Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.
So good afternoon and welcome. I'm Gordon Bloom, and I'm the Dean's Visiting Professor in Entrepreneurship in the School of Engineering and at the Keller Center for Innovation in Engineering Education. I'd like to welcome you here today. And I'd like to say we're delighted to have Bill Drayton, the founder and chair of Ashoka, who is visiting with us today. And we'll say a bit more about Bill in a minute, but I'd like to welcome you also to the launch of the student organization, the Social Entrepreneurship Initiative, which is part of the Princeton's Entrepreneurship Club. And we have two students here who will take over from me in a minute. Veda Sunasi, who is a senior and a politics major from Mauritius, and also Faz Ulhaq, who's a sophomore after a little bit of time off, who's from Pakistan. But before we really dive in, I want to say just a few things about both the Keller Center for Innovation and also a little surprise that we have for you, which the three of us would like to orchestrate. So as many of you know, in 2005, the Keller Center was established at Princeton by a generous endowment from Dennis and Constance Keller, for which we are greatly thankful, a trustee, alumnus, and longtime supporter of the engineering school and our work here, and also indicate to you that the mission of the Keller Center is to educate leaders for a technology-driven society. A broad and wonderful mission here at Princeton. The center is creating new courses and strengthening existing ones that go beyond purely technical subjects to provide students a broader understanding of the global, economic, environmental, and cultural forces that shape and are shaped by technology. At the same time, the center is enhancing students' technical education through internships, entrepreneurial opportunities, and through exposure to real leaders and entrepreneurs, and I add social entrepreneurs. So thank you, Bill, for coming today to be part of our program this year. Now, our surprise, gentlemen. I'm going to give you over to Veda, who has some remarks about the Social Entrepreneurship Initiative. Oh, to Faz, okay. And then a little something we have for Bill.
So yeah, I think we're going to build the suspense up and keep you waiting a little bit more for the surprise. I'll just quickly introduce the Social Entrepreneurship Initiative here at Princeton. Like Gordon just mentioned, we're a relatively new organization. And the way things started kicking up was this year. A bunch of students got together at the beginning of the year and were brainstorming ideas about how to make social entrepreneurship a more integral part of the Princeton experience. And, we heard about Gordon Bloom, who was a visiting professor, and he was offering a course in social entrepreneurship. And fancy that, that became the base for getting a very motivated and, diverse group of students together. And all of us got together and utilizing the existing resources, most especially the Keller Center, with the help of Cornelia, who's been incredibly helpful in getting this up, and more especially the existing Princeton Entrepreneurship Club, which has been in existence for the last 10 years. And we joined forces with the Princeton E-Club and realigned its focus. And our main event this year is going to be the new Tiger Launch, which is a business incubator competition for new businesses at Princeton. And we're delighted to tell you guys that this year we have a separate track specifically focused and geared towards social enterprises at Princeton. The Reach Out program of class of 56 and 81 have been incredibly kind, and they're sponsoring this new track this year. And just for your information, the deadline is tomorrow, and we would, for the executive summary, so if you could just come up with a one-pager and submit your idea, we'd be happy to have you as a part of the competition.
Great.
And yeah.
Thanks, Faiz. So to kickstart this initiative, we are very happy, proud, and blessed to have Bill with us today. I'm just going to say a few words about Bill. Bill Drayton is a pioneer of achieving social change under organizational principles typically associated with for-profit businesses. As a student at Harvard and Oxford University and the Yale University Law School, he founded a number of organizations, including Harvard's Ashoka Table, an interdisciplinary weekly forum in the social sciences. After serving as assistant administrator at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and working for the consulting firm McKinsey, he received the MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant in 1984. With the funding provided by the award, he devoted himself full-time to launching Ashoka, and in 2005, Bill Drayton was named one of America's 25 best leaders by U.S. News and World Report, and he's widely credited with popularizing the notion of the social entrepreneur. And here for the surprise, so as part of the Social Entrepreneurship Initiative, and we hope this to become an annual feature, we would like to present Bill Drayton with the first ever Princeton E-Club Social Entrepreneurship Initiative iCube Award, the award for innovation, inspiration, and impact. And this award is to honor people in the field of social entrepreneurship who, by virtue of their work, have inspired others by their innovative approach to problem solving and have created long-lasting impact. So, Bill, please. And with that, we'll leave the floor to Bill. Bill Drayton, everyone.
This has to be the quickest way of improving one's IQ that one has ever run into. Princeton's reputation precedes it. So I am honored here to be here at the beginning of the initiative. It's, in many ways, it's a measure of how this movement is moving out. If you think 5, 6, 7 years ago, except for Gordon at Stanford and a few other little islands, there was almost nothing happening. And then it started spreading faster and faster. And I think what that reflects is that we are just now reaching a tipping point historically, a very, very big tipping point. So I'm going to come back to that. But in fact, what I hope to do in the first half hour, and then we have hopefully the other half for conversation, is lay out what that historical change is, what it means for all of us. Those are the two basic points. There's some building blocks to get there. So to give you a sort of preview, the agricultural revolution was the last change of this magnitude. And the biggest changes are not technology, with all due respect to the engineering school across the street, but when you have a fundamental change in the structure of human society. So agriculture produced a surplus, a few people moved into towns, and all of a sudden you needed new ethical systems, new ways of organizing. We've had 10,000 years of the results of agriculture. A few people moved into Jericho, but everyone else had to stay on the land. And so we've had small elites being aware and running everything for a very long time. That's how we think about it. And part of the contract is, you come to Princeton because you're going to be part of that elite. But there is the other 98%. And that model, which was sort of carried to an extreme by Henry Ford in the assembly line, is just simply breaking down. Now, why is that? It's simply because around 1700, business broke the old traditional system. It basically said, anyone with a better idea, if you implement it, we're going to make you really happy and we're going to copy you. And that started compounding productivity growth and has really driven the history of the last 3 centuries. The result is that the rate at which change is accelerating is now quite rapid. And it's a classic accelerating curve. It's getting steeper and steeper and growing faster and faster. Well, why? Because you have more and more people creating change, and more important, you have more and more combinations of people and combinations of groups of people coming together like a giant global kaleidoscope. And so the rate and intensity and diversity and multiplicity of simultaneous change is all accelerating. We're reaching a point now where the Henry Ford model simply can't work. The old model was a few people told everyone else what to do. Now you say manage because that's a nicer word, but basically you set up a set of repetitive functions. Well, okay, if things aren't changing very much, that sort of works. But when things change very, very fast, that doesn't work. It just simply fails. And we're now at the tipping point where the old system is dying. The dinosaurs are crashing all around us. And we have very strong islands of the new world. And when you get to these tipping points, now they go very quickly. And so we're just at the point, everyone here, where we have a huge opportunity. If we see it, we can really contribute to it. And if I can help contribute to that, that would be a big success from my point of view. This sort of a change is not a small change. It affects everything. The skills we have to have, how young people have to grow up very differently. You have to manage everything differently because the old top-down pyramid doesn't work. It has to be a very open team of teams. And that affects every sector. What I was told when before coming, that one of the questions that many people would have is, how can I use the education and entrepreneurship and technology and various different backgrounds people have, not to go into finance necessarily or even law, and is there a future in the social sector beyond Teach for America? And the answer is yes. There's a huge set of choices, and it's just going to grow very rapidly. And so, again, what I hope to do is, first of all, introduce who are the social entrepreneurs, because they're playing a very key role. There's a reason that social entrepreneurship has come up dramatically in 3 decades. 30 years ago, the phrase social entrepreneur did not exist. If you don't have a word, the probability is that something was sort of missing in reality as well. Well, that is changing very, very rapidly. And so who are the social entrepreneurs? That's a key building block, and it fits into the career path questions. Then come back to the history, and then I come back around finally to what does this mean for every person and every institution? Now, first, a quick introduction. I think most of you know Ashoka, but Ashoka is like everything else now, has to change very rapidly. So we are known as being an association, a movement of some now 2,700 very leading social entrepreneurs from all across the world. They're very powerful. We just got our 9th year of impact evaluations results back from the Corporate Executive Board about 2 weeks ago. And what that shows is that 5 years after an Ashoka Fellow is elected and starts work, 52% have already changed national policies, 76% have changed the pattern in their field, on average 3.2 times, again at the national level. This is a very, very powerful community, and in the face of this change, where these people are playing such a key role, Ashoka not only helps find them, helps them get started, helps them succeed over their life and create a community, but now we're actually entrepreneuring together, and this is something absolutely new in the world and incredibly powerful. So that's who we are. That's why we're privileged to be able to see these patterns. All right, so now, if I may, let me introduce you to a couple of social entrepreneurs. And I'm going to start with a simple question. What's the most powerful force in the world? We think it's a big idea, but only if it's in the hands of an entrepreneur. It's that combination that really moves things. Now, as I go through the next 1 or 2 examples, the first 1 or 2 examples, if you ask yourself, what are the common factors? if you want to be one of these people, what do you have to do? And if you want to find them for investment or collaboration, what are you looking for? So I hope I do this right now. Okay. Mary Gordon, we elected about 4 years ago. She was a teacher in Toronto. And she saw a problem. More and more of the children were coming to her class, and when another child made them uncomfortable, their only response was aggression, which of course invites aggression back. And every time you go through that cycle, it gets deeper. And the probability of those children being able to play in the modern world gets less. And the prospect of the school being an attractive place to live in is also less. So she gave herself permission to say, I'm going to change this system, not just for my class, but for growing up in general. I give you a clue. You're now onto a clue of one of the things that defines an entrepreneur. And she immediately, automatically was asking, how do I change the whole school system? Well, that's sort of difficult. School systems are a bit resistant. So it has to be really simple. I jump ahead to some impact measures. 4 years later, she's gone from 2 schools to 2,000 schools in Canada. There are 5 other countries engaged. The first 18 schools have started in Seattle this fall. And the Canadians who have good statistics on bullying rates come down and stay down. Now, what does she do? She brings an infant, less than 1 year old, to the class. She asks the schools to give her 1, preferably 2 hours a month for a year, so 8 to 16 hours. And the infant wears a little T-shirt called The Professor, and comes with mom, occasionally dad, and there's a green blanket for the professor to reside on. And the students, not the faculty, the teacher, have a responsibility of figuring out what is the professor saying, and later what is the professor feeling. There's a series of exercises. Now, and this is limbic learning. It works. This is really simple. Anyone in this room could have figured that out if we had given ourselves permission to look and see the problem and then figure out what's a simple solution. There's no rocket science here. Blast. I always do something untoward on these podiums. So why is this so important? Well, those children have a possibility of a future if they have the social skill of empathy. Now, the faster the world changes, the less of a human life that is covered by rules. And if you don't have the skill of empathy, which is not genetic, it's a learned skill, it's a very complicated learned skill. If you don't have that skill, you are going to hurt people and you're going to disrupt institutions and you are out. They don't care if you have Sanskrit or computer science. Now that's, we believe, the single most important reason that 25–30% of the world's people are marginalized, which is the cruelest, most awful thing you can do to anyone and is a disaster for society. There are people not too far from this campus who are in that position. They belong to communities that do not have this skill. They're not getting it on the street or in the school. Mary is a solution. Jill Violette is a Californian fellow, and her idea is quite complementary. She goes to the schools and says, don't cancel recess. Let me hire a local young person, and we will run recess so that it's an intensive experience in group play, which is, of course, group play is how young children practice this set of skills. You can see these two fellows' ideas fit together. She's in 10 schools now, 10 cities now, 170 schools. She expects to have about 1 million low-income students in this country having this experience by 2012. By then she'll be in 28 cities. So again, is this rocket science? No, but it's a very practical solution that works and that's really important. And the power, now I could give you, there are 500 Ashoka Fellows dealing with children and young people, and their ideas fit together like a giant mosaic. I'm going to come back to this theme about children and young people in a minute, but I just wanted to assure you that Ashoka is not only about this. The central figure in this picture is not an Ashoka fellow, but this is a giant African rat who is actually quite smart and has a really good sense of smell and is quite light. Now, what is this rat doing? The rat is sniffing whether or not there are any landmines there. Now, a human or a dog that makes a misstep, that's the end of them. But the rat is light enough that they don't explode, but they've got a very good sense of smell, and they can smell these things. The same rat is, through the same fellow, is also a frontline test for TB. You take a bunch of samples of spit, and the rat smells them, and I don't know what it does. It signals that this one is TB. And I thought this would be a good example because I figured there'd be some technology-oriented people around, and this would give some sense of the diversity. One more case, and this is again, in case there's anyone with a business or finance background. This is another aspect of education. This is a Colombian fellow, Felipe Vergara, and what he gave himself permission to see that the way we finance education in most of the world is really, really dumb. The government has no idea how many veterinary places or undergraduate places are needed. So they sort of keep building them. There's no market clearing price. And then they underprice them because they're trying to be nice to people and win people's support. So now what happens, everyone remember Act 1, when you have too few of something, too little of something that people really want, and you underprice it. Influence comes to bear. Corruption is another word for it. One of my closest friends in India, his father founded 9 law colleges in what is now called Mumbai. And you go to dinner at that house, and I would guess 1 out of 6 times someone is there, and somewhere late in the dinner people say, oh, you know, my niece really smart. Don't you think she should? Yeah, sure, niece really smart. She should go to law school. Have her come and see me. And then, a little bit later, there's a favor that goes back the other way. And in places where corruption is at a hyper level, such as Nigeria, it's not so subtle. The implications of this is that as young people are starting their life, they know the system is corrupt. It's also highly inefficient. And for the people who are poor and middle class who have to borrow to pay for even if it's only a third of the real cost, that system doesn't work. If they fall ill, then the thing clanks along, beating them down. The array of choices are limited. Right, so what Felipe has done is he's created a series so far of 17 for-profit human capital funds. You could invest in any of these, any of the new ones. So one will be for 10,000 Peruvian undergraduates. A relatively recent one was for Mexican students with disability. Well, you don't know what any one student's going to earn, but a group that size, you do know what the pattern of earning is going to be. So you can predict what the revenues could be at various charging rates. So what he does is he said, you graduate, we give you the funds for going to school, you sign this, we hope, litigation-free contract. And for 15 years, you have an obligation. If you are ill, you don't pay anything. If you earn a little, you pay a little. If you earn a lot, you pay up to 15% of a lot. It's calculated to have about a 20% return. Now, you could see where that's heading. More and more, once this is established and is perceived to be safe, your friends at Goldman Sachs and UBS, they'll be happy to sell you a nice 8% return in something that's doing something socially very useful. The capital shortage in education is gone. With the shortage being gone, the roots of the corruption system are swept away. The system has an incentive the funds have an incentive to inform students and parents, this place is really not so good and don't waste your money there. So information is flows, but anyway, you can see. Now, in all four of these cases, what you've got is someone who's given themselves permission to see a problem and find a solution and continuously work to make it happen. Everyone here can do that. Most people in the world have been told all their lives, no, you can't do that, and they believe it. So please, that's my plea, please don't allow people to do that. So now, you probably have got most of the criteria. This is what if you're on an Ashoka selection panel, you'd say, is there a pattern-changing new idea that's going to operate at the continental level or not? Is the person creative and goal-setting, problem-solving? Is the person entrepreneurial? By that, we do not mean getting things done, leadership, management. Millions of people can do that. The core here is the person going to not be able to stop until they've changed the pattern in the field? That means they're going to be realistic, they're going to keep at it for decades. It's a constant iterative creative process. Once the idea is demonstrated in one place, will other people in the field say, oh, that's a good solution, that's practical, let me try that. And finally, ethical fiber. Now, this is really, really important. So let me pause on this for a moment. The faster things change, the more we need everyone to be a change maker. That's where we're headed. When you're a change maker operating, and everyone around you is operating fast, you're very powerful. And if you are not skilled at not hurting, and put it the other way, at being really good at helping people and helping the institutions and society, you become not only very powerful for the good, but for the bad. And so the system simply requires you to be really good. So ethical fiber is not just a nice thing, it is an absolutely essential thing. For entrepreneurs who are, of course, the cutting edge of this, we are always asking people to do things that they would not normally reasonably do. And they do it. Not because of the clever words we say. The transaction is at a much deeper level. It's, do I trust this person? The primitive brain judges that very quickly. And then, is this person completely married to this idea? Well, for a good person who is an entrepreneur, those register strong yeses, and then people are with you. And then they'll listen to your words. If you don't have that, that thing doesn't work at all. So this is just completely fundamental, and it ties into the point I was making earlier about just how critical having the skill of empathy is. That's the underlying skill you have to have before you get to teamwork or leadership or change making, which is the 4 key social skills. And just ask yourself, how many people running elementary schools know that they're failing if there's one second grader who's not mastered empathy? It's not even in the discussion at the moment. So that's an example of the opportunities we all have to change this picture. Now, I gave you the most recent results. This is a summary of the first 7 years. It's very steady over time. People don't quit this sort of work. They love what they're doing, so they stay at it, 97, 98%. You've got the second bar is roughly 90% have had independent institutions copy the idea. And then over the 9 years we've been doing this, it ranges from 49 to 60%. And as I say, last year it was 52%, have had national policy change because of their intervention within 5 years. Now, you think about these measures. We're doing this 5 years out because when an entrepreneur is getting started, you can't do comparative analysis because it's a brand new idea. There's nothing to compare it to. And the entrepreneur doesn't know how it's going to work, and they don't know exactly how they're going to get there. And to ask them to come up with a detailed business plan is a completely unrealistic fantasy. What they know is that this is a big win for everyone, and they're going to figure it out. But 5 years later, you can ask some questions. Is the system really changing? And I wanted to dwell on this for a moment because universities are always pushing for more quantitative analysis, and judgment is just as important, like bar graphs. I was at McKinsey for 10 years, how could I not? But judgment is really, really important. And as you're thinking about how to design any system, and remember, the faster the world changes, the more we have to be changing systems. It's not doing anyone a service to not take judgment as being as valuable as analysis. It can be quite disciplined. That's what I'm trying to show here. Okay, now, so far we're at the first level of Ashoka's work. When you think about how Mary and Jill's work fits together, you begin to see the second level. Our core process is we have an open source beginning. We look for any idea. We have no definition of subject matter. If we did, we'd always be behind the curve because it's always the entrepreneurs who see something for the first time. Once we get a couple of hundred entrepreneurs, people who have bet their lives that they're going to cause major structural change in this field from all over the world, it's not us saying, you know, we're so smart that we can tell that this issue is really cool and this is the right time. These people's lives are on the line. Entrepreneurs do not like to write books. They don't do that. They cause change, and if they can't cause change, they're deeply frustrated. So they don't move until they think they've got something that's really going to move the system in a big way. When you get a couple of hundred, it's not only does it say the system's going to move, but it's telling you it's going to make an S-curve jump. It's not an incremental change in the system as it is now. There's going to be a change in the system. So if you think back at what I was saying about children and young people here, the change in the system is, I can explain it very simply. The old system was, you got to learn things. You got to learn the rules. You've got to learn knowledge. That doesn't do it anymore. The half-life of knowledge is getting short. The rules cover less and less. You have to have these 4 social skills to be able to function in the society where we're headed now very quickly. Remember, that curve of change is escalating faster and faster. And it's empathy, teamwork, leadership, and then the highest level of leadership, change-making. Every one of those are learned skills. And so that is a redefinition of what good parenting is, what good education is, and probably most important, it's a redefinition of what young people have to understand as they organize their own lives, what's important. So our job, and everyone in this room can contribute to that, is to help people see that new S-curve jump. All right, so that's an example of, and I could give you examples in Law for All, business and society coming together in a unified business system. These are all cases where there are hundreds of entrepreneurs, and you can see there's going to be a really big jump, and then you have to figure out what it is, and then what are the 1 or 2 things that are going to get us there. And then, and this is something that's completely new, has never been done before, we're just learning how to do it. By then we have 300, 500 of the world's leading social entrepreneurs, plus business entrepreneur partners, and we can entrepreneur together to tip the world to the new S-curve. So I'm just going to take the example of every young child must master empathy. What do we as a group have to do to tip the world there? Well, every continent except Europe and Africa, there's one country that's over half the population. So if you take China, Indonesia, India, Brazil, US, those are the core 5. And then you've got the Arabs who are splintered, but that's another sort of 500 million people, and you have the Japanese, German, and French tribes, and it sort of peters off. So somewhere in the range of 9 to 10, if you can get those, you can really tip the whole world. And so what do we have to do in each of those? In the case of every child must master empathy, our goal is that many parents most principals know that there is a huge problem if any second grader has not mastered empathy. Now, that's not a very complicated goal. We can do that. And we can certainly do it when we have many of the leading entrepreneurs in the field in those key countries who immediately can say, all right, if we have to get 3% of the influential schools to do this, and we have to get 35 of the key influencers, scholars, journalists, policy people, trade union leaders, all right, who are they? Which ones are going to be most important? Who's going to get it? Who knows them? Well, we have that knowledge. And so entrepreneuring together is something completely new. It was, and that's a function, and what I've just been describing to you, the world where we're going, I think, is going to be a team of teams. And we are facilitating in this process, creating a team of whatever entrepreneurs have come up, wherever they are in the world, to think and act together. And that team will work as long as the task needs to be done, and then it will be gone. It will be new teams coming. And the people on that team all have to have the skills of being a team member. A team, everyone is a player. And in the world we're going to be a player means you got to be a change maker. This is a radically, radically different world. And so we're living through this change just as much as any sector in society. And it's very exciting, but it's also, if we fell behind on this, we would not be in business long. Again, you already have much of this change that's coming. So let me go back to the history. Again, agriculture, small surplus, few people run everything. That no longer works because we need to be a team of teams. And that means everyone's got to have the skills to be a player, has to be a change maker. Well, now, so let me ask you a couple of questions. Against you know that basic backdrop. You know that the rate of change is accelerating, and mathematically, anyone who's better at math than I knows what that curve means. It took 50 years for the main cities in this country and around the world, who are the center of prosperity and energy in the industrial era, to die, because they didn't make the jump to this new everyone a change maker world. Silicon Valley's lemon groves became a news center. Bangalore, a sleepy cantonment town, became a news center. But how many other cities didn't make it? Well, that took 50 years. This next time we maybe have 10 or 15 years, because the rate at which change is moving. If we don't change what's happening with children and young people in this country now, we're not going to have a population able to be a team of teams, and we are toast, as long as someone else gets there faster than we do. That's true for a company, a city, an ethnic group, whatever. Ask yourself, what is the key factor for success for any group? It's not technology. The half-life of that's getting shorter. Ditto marketing, ditto natural resources. You would think that natural resources would get more and more expensive as there's more and more people in activity. No, the secular line of commodity pricing is going down because we substitute faster and faster. So the one thing that's sustainable competitive advantage is what proportion of the people in this city, country, company, citizen group are change makers, at what level, how well do they work together? Let me see if I can jump here. You probably recognize these two. These two created one of the first Everyone a Changemaker organization, the Jesuits. It's 450 years old. It's outlived virtually every corporation, because there weren't even corporations existing when they got started. It certainly outlived the Fortune 500 of 20 or 30 years ago. Now, this is an example when a profound change like this gets underway. We already have islands that tell us what it's going to be like. The Jesuits, whenever you talk to someone who was ever a Jesuit, they let you know sometime in the first 4 to 8 paragraphs after you meet them, because they're so proud of it. the Jesuits' exercise is say, step back, and are you doing the most you possibly can in works and faith? And then a little bit, this is a regular exercise for every Jesuit, and are you doing it in love? Well, that's, what I've just been saying about what defines an entrepreneur and how it's got to be based on underlying ethics. Well, surprise. These people, the popes have tried to kill them. Everyone's been upset with them. They can work with people in the building communities in the Amazon. They can work with the Chinese emperor. All right, Silicon Valley, what is it? It's a huge magnet. If you're a change maker, you don't go to Sioux City, with all due respect to Sioux City. You want to go where the other change makers are. The institutions there are competing to get the best change makers and help them work together in the best possible way. That's Google's advantage. If it loses that advantage, it's toast. Well, and all this feeds on itself and builds. So we're not imagining the future. We can see it right in front of our eyes. So there you've got it, Silicon Valley versus Detroit. And every human institution has that choice now. Where is this going to head? I'm very optimistic because I think we're just now about to go through the awareness tipping process. The islands are there. It's clear the old system doesn't work. More and more people, when you talk to them about their 15-year-old daughter or sister and say, well, if she's not practicing change-making, where is she going to be in 30 years if she doesn't have those skills? And people now say, oh, that's a problem. That's because we're so close. All I'm doing is giving words to describe the reality of where we are and where we're headed. And once people see it and they see that other people are seeing it, then they move. Once you have one hotel company that does this and it becomes dramatically more competitive than the others, they have a short period, they either shift or they're toast. So this is going to come, we're at the tipping point now, and that's why this is so urgent. And also, going to people's careers, that's why this is such an amazing moment. If you see this and you give yourself permission to be a player in this change, you can have a huge impact because there hasn't been a time since the agricultural revolution when bigger, more fundamental, more hopeful changes are afoot. And unlike agricultural revolution, this is not going to take a few thousand years. This is moving very fast. So in the professional lives of everyone in this room, there's a huge opportunity. You just got to see it and give yourself permission. When you think about it in terms of, I'm now on the relevancies for everyone. If you care about a young person and that 15-year-old or 12-year-old says, I'm sort of thinking about a virtual radio station or tutoring service, you'd say, yeah, that's a great idea. Don't let anyone tell you you can't do that, because a lot of people will. In most schools, the youth culture is not competent. They don't know how to do this because we made it really difficult. That's not true at Andover. There's a student organization for every 9 students there, and the students are in charge. But that's not what's happening in the normal middle school or high school in this country. Where does any young person have the real freedom to do something? Well, in the class, who controls that? Sports, if it's still there, who controls that? Who controls whatever student organizations? I mean, this is really craziness. This is foot binding of the spirit going on. And we're increasing the gap between the small elite that has this and the people here are part of that small elite and everyone else. And we can't even see the difference. A 15-year-old black girl who's part of the Ashoka's youth venture just articulated this beautifully last summer, and she said, I get it. It's not gender, it's not race, it's whether or not you're a change maker that divides the powerful and the not powerful, and that's only going to get to be more so. So, for God's sakes, if you see any young person who wants to do something, tell them to start dreaming like Mary and Jill and practice that. That's the best thing you can do for them. And if they succeed in doing it and a couple of others do, then you can start tipping the culture one school after another. do you care about an institution? Almost everyone is a member of a religious institution, a company. We live in a world of groups. Well, is your group going to make that transition? Does it see it? How can you help them make that transition? What sort of skills do you have to develop as this world evolves? And we're all going to have to develop these skills. One of the things that characterizes this period, there's no plateau. We're not going to come up to this level of empathetic skill. It's just going to have to be higher the next year. And so this is going to be a great world, but this is the most historic change we've been through. And the social entrepreneurs are right at the center of it. They come up, our job, what do entrepreneurs do? Our job is to see the new patterns and make them happen, to change the system. That's what distinguishes an entrepreneur from a change maker. In doing that, they're role models, and they're also mass recruiters of local change makers. And this is one of the only differences between business and social entrepreneurship. The business model is you capture a market and you dig a moat. Social entrepreneur says, no, we want to change the world and we want everyone to follow us. And we make our ideas accessible and safe and easy to use. And in doing that, we're saying to people, please stand up. You be a change maker too. Well, that's part of the engine of getting to an everyone a change maker world. So this is, once you see it, it's really easy and it's fun and it's incredibly exciting because it's about giving. And what people want to do more than anything else is to express love and respect in action by giving. Okay, so that's my overview here. And so it's over to you. What should we talk about?
Linda, you have a mic right there. There's a mic here. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll pass the mic.
I'm interested if you could say something a little more about the idea of a team, because it seems...
Jane, why don't you just identify yourself?
Sorry?
If you would identify yourself.
Oh, yes. So I'm Jane Harrison. I teach in the architecture department. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I come from England originally, and I came here as a child the first time, and one of the fundamental cultural differences for me was the orientation or the importance of the team in American culture as opposed to other concepts of social interaction and so on in Europe. And it seems to me that the structure of the team has been fundamental in the formations of the corporation, in the power structures in this country, and yet I sense that you're talking about the team in a slightly different way. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that in light of the kind of shift from the kind of Henry Ford kind of models to, in a sense, the kind of future that you're charting out.
Well, first, I have to rise to the defense of England because I think England actually played a very key role in understanding how important teams were, and it's completely central to England's contribution. We did a very interesting survey of team sports. We identified 55 team sports in the world, and all of them, with 4 exceptions, were created in England or one of the countries that deeply influenced: Ireland, Scotland, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. There's an utterly obscure German one, late 19th century, which I've never heard of before or since and is unpronounceable. And then there's a series of, the Aztec rubber ball game and lacrosse and polo. Those are ambiguous. Polo was systematized in 1846 by the British in Manipur, but was it just, people hitting, moving carcasses, or was it? But it's just overwhelming. And why? Because part of this revolution, which England was so central in, once you have decentralized, so you say, please, let's have lots of people take initiative, which is how this tiny little wet island overcame Ireland, the Spanish and the French and the Germans and everyone else. because a much higher proportion of their people were actually able to contribute. But that's setting in motion a fission process, and the atoms have to be self-disciplined. And so, the saying "the future of empire is formed on the playing fields of Eton," that people were aware of that. And so I think England is not innocent of contributing to this. But of course it's different because, when a curve goes like that, the level of skill that's required is very different. If you think about the Sermon on the Mount, it's an early stage of empathy. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I mean, it's not you really understanding who they are, which is a higher level of empathy, which we have to have now. So, and this is, of course, one of the challenges. The level of skill, empathy, teamwork, leader, all four of them, the level of skill is getting higher and higher as the world gets more complex. But the basic idea of a team is that everyone is a player, and when the ball comes to them, they run with it, but they run with it with the whole in mind. And now it's got to be not just a small team, but a team of teams. You've got to think about a much more complicated set of joint objectives. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I think it's a longer question. I'm interested in where the team suppresses the innovation and where it supports innovation, because it seems that teams can do both, and it's a kind of complex animal in that sense.
No, this is one of the conversations that we have with the Google management, is that when you have several tens of thousands of people, you've got to somehow have all that energy ultimately coalesce into new products in their case. In our case, it's looking out of the 500 and saying, all right, you got to learn social skills, not just memorize knowledge and rules. Mary and Jill see their work differently because we now articulate that. It's much easier for them to work together because we have a common set of goals. And, so you're exactly right. That is, how do you run an integrated, decentralized organization or society or religious group or whatever, which has to be made up of collegial entrepreneurial people who have both sets of skills. And that's, that is, all of us are going to be busy inventing new ways of organizing and managing, but that's exactly the goal and that's exactly the tension.
Where do you see the most resistance? Hi, I'm Rachel Steinberg, undergrad at Woodrow Wilson School. And I also work with Gordon on the social enterprise class. I was just wondering where you see the most resistance to these ideas and why you think that is.
It's a really good question. What immediately comes to mind is a video I saw with an 8-year-old friend not so long ago, where the little mammals were ducking for cover from these very large, extremely ugly creatures that were somewhere between birds and dinosaurs. I didn't know there was such a thing. Of course, this is very threatening, and getting through this transition is very hard, and we're seeing a lot of the symptoms of that. If you are trained as an engineer and you can't understand this social dimension, that's pretty threatening. And they're very, look at the anger we have in some communities in this society who are out of the picture. You read Jeffrey Canada's autobiography. He describes communities, South Bronx, when he was growing up, where the culture is, don't be a victim, respond with aggression. It's a completely coherent culture. It's totally enforced. Well, how on earth is a kid growing up in that culture who doesn't run into Mary Gordon, how is he ever going to learn these skills? And if he doesn't, what happens? Well, those people get rejected. We have maybe a quarter of the young African Americans in Washington, males, going to jail in the course of a typical year. No one is really happy in this picture. it's completely socially dysfunctional. I mean, how many people at General Motors are really happy today? So how do we help people through this very rapid rate of change? I am optimistic because I think once you get through the awareness tipping process and people can see it and understand it, it's not that hard. I mean, the good news is that 70% of the world's people have learned enough of these skills in 1 century to be in the game, or at least they're not out of the game. The trick, so it's very hard, and I know that we're going to have huge dysfunctions and conflicts until we're through. But once we're through, the system is completely reinforcing. Did I?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
More questions?
My friend.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So you talk about kind of. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Jacob Hiller. I'm a senior in the chemistry department, also in Gordon's class. So you talk about kind of revolutionizing early childhood education, or just childhood education, kind of in favor of sort of these 4 major skills that are sort of underemphasized, maybe in preference to more standard education. And I completely understand where you're coming from. I imagine you probably mean, though, that like we should integrate them in with standard education. I mean, maybe teaching science in a way that's more collaborative. Could you maybe go into a little more detail on how you would imagine a specific educational program to do that, to integrate these kinds of skills?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, we know from looking at the Ashoka Fellows dealing with children and young people across the world that when you treat young people with respect and you assume that they're competent and you help them develop a youth culture that is competent, not surprisingly, they are less alienated, less frustrated, less angry, and even the traditional measures of education, language and math, shoot up. So they actually fit together very nicely. If you want people to be responsible and motivated to learn, well, if you insult people and say you're incompetent and stay out of the way, we run everything, thank you very much. Well, where have you heard that before? That's how we used to treat colonial people and women and so on and so forth. And no one has ever liked that. This is the last group of people that we treat this way, almost the last group. And, if you think about what really good classroom teaching is about, it's about group learning and experiential learning and problem solving and moving away from rote memorization. And, it's a complete fit. And so I give you other examples. Peace Games, I just was at PS 191 in New York. Well, that's in the class. Well, there's another fellow, I'm just giving you examples from this society based in Charlotte, and there's a zone when young girls lose it, 5th grade through 8th grade typically. And so she's addressing that. Well, all these pieces fit together and they're all aimed in the same direction, saying, you're a competent person, you've got to develop these skills, you can, and we're going to support you doing that. And, before we started something called Ashoka's Youth Venture, and one of our colleagues is actually here, which is now in 30 countries around the world. What we'd like to see is 100,000 young Americans and similar other countries every year, 12 through 20, have their own idea, build their own team, and leave something changed. Now, our experience is they'll have 20 to 25 kids per group. If you get 4 or 5 in a middle school, such teams to succeed in 2 years, that's 100 kids telling everyone else, come join us, use our service. You can start tipping these cultures in the direction of being competent. And then anyone who's trying to reform the school in a good way in terms of teaching, all the other pieces start reinforcing one another, and it reinforces the movement to an everyone a Changemaker world. And parents get it, and if the kids are getting it, it helps the parents see it. It's a very virtuous cycle.
My name is Sam Daly Harris. I'm director of the Microcredit Summit campaign and a resident of Princeton. I'd like to ask two questions. The first is, and I may have misidentified this, I've hung out with some amazing social entrepreneurs, and I've always described them as A, rule breakers, and B, they didn't have training. Muhammad Yunus' training was in economics, and Fazal Abid of BRAC came from Shell Oil, and Ingrid Munro and Jamie Bora in Kenya was an architect and urban planner. They didn't know any of the rules of A, banking, and B, had no compunction about breaking whatever maybe the perceived rules were of microfinance. The first question is about, have I misidentified this as to people are not only rule breakers, but they often come in not even knowing the rules, and so consequently not tied to them. Second question is, I've been around a number of young people in the last year where it's been very, I'm a social entrepreneur, and there's some kind of desperation around it, and where the people I mentioned earlier, they never said they were social entrepreneurs, and they had all the time in the world, in a sense. They just sort of trial and errored their way. In a sense, they weren't stuck with their first idea. They had some kind of luxury of time, although of course they were confronted by famines and slums and other things, but it wasn't. So do you see any disadvantage to being driven to be a social entrepreneur as compared to these folks I mentioned, who it was more in the course of life itself that they did what they did, rather than like, oh gosh, it's already 4:30 in the afternoon, I better be a social entrepreneur by 5 kind of thing. And there's this kind of urgency that might have people miss some of the biggest opportunities that just are a little farther over their horizon.
Well, for those of you who don't know, Sam is one of the great social entrepreneurs. Oh God, I've now done something. What am I supposed to do? Oh, right. Sam created Results, which is the first major organization all across the country in a grassroots way, pushed for this country to be engaged in intelligent development around the world. And then he formed a partnership with Yunus to do, which I think was the most important thing Yunus has done, actually, which is not invent microcredit, which he didn't, but to be the first person to take a major social change and market it across the world. And this quiet reference to the Microcredit Summit, Sam is the first person who has basically stepped in as a private citizen social entrepreneur to do what previously required the United Nations to create a world summit to get everyone to agree on a standard and set of goals and then make it happen. All done very modestly, but with great power. So he speaks with real authority here. So good entrepreneurs don't even see boundaries. They see what needs to be done, and the boundaries don't make any sense, so they just don't waste any time worrying about them. I mean, except you've got to deal with people who get upset with you. But so the first part, I think, is true. And the second is, I think, if you're setting out to do something really big, you don't think it's going to be done in the time horizon that's appropriate for a salaried job. This is not a case that you do in court. This is how do you change the whole society and increasingly the whole world. I mean, Sam didn't say, I'm just going to do it for one country. He's going to get the whole world to do this microcredit thing, and he was going to force the World Bank and everyone else to do it. Well, if you have a really big goal and you understand how society works, and you furthermore know that you don't really know, as I said earlier, exactly how you're going to get there or exactly how it's going to work, you know it's going to take time. Now, it doesn't mean you're not impatient, you aren't always pushing, entrepreneurs are, but it also, you have, I think, a different sense of time horizon, which is, it's military strategy, the importance of depth. Well, I think entrepreneurs have time depth in their self-definition. What would you say, Sam? I bet you have a point of view about this.
No, I'm just fascinated by these people who, the entire field of microfinance says you can't make microloans successfully to beggars, thieves, prostitutes, and gang members. So nobody does it. Then Ingrid Munro does it. And it's like, then it gets kind of back to your question, like, who opposes this stuff? When I read that book that David Bornstein did on Ashoka, I got to the first chapter and the second, and I said, yes, this is real. There's government opposition on every page. The policymakers don't get it, resist it, and the guy in Brazil or the guy over here or the woman there, that was the resistance they were constantly fighting, the resistance of policymakers to something different, to something new. And so it's a fascinating field to watch and be part of.
I think we have time for one more question. We have one maybe at the back.
Hi, my name's Dan. I'm an undergraduate. Also taking Gordon's class. Kind of on the question of resistance. You talk about the woman from Toronto and going from 2 schools to 2,000 schools. And yeah, the question of how do you really make these things expand, especially in the face of resistance? The project that I'm working on in Gordon's class, we have an idea about healthcare communication and ways of really effectively dealing with that. And that's a field where there's a lot of people who've been in the field for a very long time and a lot of research. And if we find that what we're doing works, how do we get a domino effect, or how do we get that idea out there? So yeah, that's my question. How do you really deal where there's a lot of resistance?
And what is the idea?
So the project that we were working on is use a community-based initiative to address women's cancers in an African nation, where we see some forms of traditional media not having the same relevance.
Well, I don't know the exact answer there, obviously, but the fact that you're asking the question means you're most of the way there. So, what are the available channels? What are the ones that are developing? What are the ones that exist in other areas that may have nothing to do with health, that are reaching the same people effectively? And right now there are so many new channels of communication opening up, and so many different ways of organizing, and the level of competence and self-confidence in populations across the world is so improved that I don't know, as I say, the specifics, but I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. We Ashoka in this case, as part of a demonstration that if you take business and society, you can do things that neither can do. Well, if you go to the state of Punjab in India right now, you will find in a half dozen villages, and will probably be in 600 by the end of the year, bright blue buildings sitting near a well. And in that, there are 3 things. There's a reverse osmosis machine, and 70–80% of the villagers, it turns out, are willing to pay for safe drinking and cooking water. There's a micro pharmacy, but it's able to cover 98% of the needs. There are a few exotic things it doesn't have. And then there's distance diagnosis, which is digitally done. So the doctor is sitting comfortably in a city. The doctor does 50,000 diagnoses a month. Artificial intelligence and paraprofessionals are a part of that. Well, this changes very dramatically the health situation in those villages, and our plan is to move this thing out broadly, specifically to take the software and the organizational approach and find different business and social partners in Brazil and Philippines, etc. And in this case, we've been able to get for-profit venture capital funding. Now, I give you many, many examples. We all know that all of a sudden the barrier to getting to individual people that had existed and was caught in the iron grip of the corrupt national monopoly Post and Telegraph's office has been broken. And all over the world, cell phones have suddenly become available, and they're becoming more and more powerful. Well, that's only the beginning. You know, think about the cloud, and I mean, there's so many technical things. But in addition to that, the example I was just giving you couldn't work if business and society were not at the level that they were both entrepreneurial and competitive. Since 1980, the citizen sector became entrepreneurial and competitive structurally. We've been catching up with business in productivity, scale, and now globalization very fast. So now it's actually quite practical to do joint ventures. Instead of having two systems that don't talk to one another, both of them being highly suboptimal, you can take the best of both and create a dramatic productivity gain in virtually every sector. Well, what I've just been describing to you is tearing down a wall that is a deep barrier, has been a deep barrier preventing people having this kaleidoscopic team of teams coming together. And so, you know, it's just an example of how fluid and open things are. If you give since I think this is the last question, I come back to my central theme. Everyone here can do what Jill and Mary and Philippi and the other 2,700 fellows do. They gave themselves permission. The very fact that you're asking this question, and this is one of Gordon's great contributions, is that he starts people actually having the experience of seeing a problem and asking a question and beginning to, you know, it's the first time you get on the bicycle, then all of a sudden it doesn't look so scary. And, you know, the biggest barrier we have is that we've had 10,000 years where we were all told, no, 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 you can't do it. We, the small elite, do everything. And I mean, you know, we've got to break out of that mindset as well as all the other barriers.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Bill, for the leadership and inspiration that you've given us. Thank you so much for coming. We have a reception in the back, and again, such a beautiful and wonderful occasion to have you here at Princeton.
Thank you.